Hey YouTube, welcome back. We just finished pushing to wave 352 in this weekend's hardcore Void Knight race. For those of you who don't know, there's a streamer, Vision GL. I'll put his information in the description of this video here. He does weekend races every single weekend for the last Epoch community. Been doing them for a while, and I highly recommend them to you as well. So this weekend was the Void Knight specific tournament. Hardcore and softcore happened at the same time, but what you need to know is that this is no banned skills. And the three selected skills were Erasing Strike, Abyssal Echoes, and Void Cleave. So you had to have one of those in your build and then kind of tie the whole room together with the rest of your skills. So we chose to do Abyssal Echoes, and if you've seen any of my other content here on YouTube, you know that I'm a sucker for Void Knights and Devouring Orb. So we played something very similar to the Devouring Orb video that I put out for this current patch, for patch 084, and we chose to do a non-crit Devouring Orb character using Abyssal Echoes for single target. So the whole non-crit thing worked out pretty well for us. I felt like my damage was good, even at wave 350 in the arena. We have crit multi, because why not? This thing gives us 74 crit multi for 1 point in the Void Knight tree. But there's no crit chance, there's no crit multi, there's no crit anywhere. Because we're using a staff instead of a scepter or wand, we get to have spell damage and void damage as our prefix modifiers here. If I were using a wand, I'd have to go spell damage and spell crit, or spell damage and cast speed. Those would be like my other prefix options. But because we're using a staff, we get like a whole bunch of percent increased damage. We'd like to have a temple staff instead, but this is the biggest thing that I could find. Our idols look pretty familiar. We just have like a bunch of like relevant stats defensively, as much vitality as possible, some vitality and some percent increased armor as well, and then some inspiration to give us some extra cooldown recovery speed. The payoff for using a staff is not only that you get spell damage, void damage. So like I don't need damage over time, because damage over time wouldn't scale Abyssal Echoes and Devouring Orb, it would only scale one of them. So spell and void damage scale both parts of my damage, and I can get them both here. The other advantage to using a two-handed weapon is that we get to use Titan Heart. So ever since the introduction of legendary items, we can use a Titan Heart for 15% less damage taken while wielding a two-handed melee weapon. I was aiming for either vitality, void damage, health, or percent health. I ended up getting damage on it, so we just used this for pretty much the entire race here, and it's just excellent. It's like exactly what I want. The other thing that I want to call out with regard to legendary stuff is we have this chest piece with reduced damage taken on it, and then we also have basically permanent haste. So if you think about it, we kind of built our own Wings of Argentus at home, right? The other legendary item that we can call out here is I had a lot of trouble finding a good relic, but I did find a 2 LP Grimoire. Honestly, if I didn't have this legendary, I'd probably use it anyways, just because it's the most relevant relic that I had access to. It was either this or like something that had 50 void damage on it. And it's like, you know what? We've got a lot of void damage already. We're using a staff here. I'd like to have more defenses. Pretty much the way that I approach Void Knight builds is like you have enough offense from the rest of your echoes and your skill tree and your skills. Like it's really high damage, but like what can you do to add defense to your build? Keeping that in mind, this is like another way that you could build a Void Knight in order to have a good chunk of defense while maintaining all that good the good offense. So we have the reduced damage taken here. We have reduced damage taken here. We have some less damage taken from our amulet here. And then that's about it, because you don't really get much access to other kind of defense from Void Knight. So that's a long explanation. Let's do a quick rundown of the character. If you've seen Void Knight characters, you know what this looks like already. This is Devouring Orb. This is how I would recommend building it. We have all the points over here on the right. We have some points over here on the left, and then as much duration as possible, and 1 point into Cosmic Impact just in the bottom middle, because running into a pack of enemies and having additional hits feels really good. So I still recommend all this. We tried out something else during this tournament. We tried out dropping all of the Abyssal Orbs and speccing into both Soul Eater and Extinction. It was interesting, but it felt anemic. It felt like it was missing something. And as it turns out, it was. So just like Abyssal Orbs, I'm doubling down on this. Abyssal Orbs is the only way that I would build this kind of character. Next up is Abyssal Echoes. This is very familiar stuff. We were talking to some other people playing in the tournament, and we were also talking to Dread from Epic Builds here on YouTube. And they were playing like, I want to call it like a turbo Abyssal Echo build, where it just scales all damage over time. It uses Devouring Orb almost exclusively for proccing a bunch of small hits, but not really scaling the Devouring Orb damage intentionally. And then you come all the way over here to no cooldown and spec all these points into mana efficiency. That build looks really good. It has incredible single target damage. It'd be really good for like bossing or like killing Julra in tier 4 dungeons, something like that. But it's not what I wanted to be doing. So we just kept we kept the main skeleton here, getting as much damage as possible, and these Abyssal Rifts casting Abyssal Echo for you, which is great. And then we have 1 point over here for Armor Shred stacks, which procs 5 times on each initial burst. And then we have 1 little point over here into Spreading Chaos, just to give us a little bit more reach into a dense pack of enemies, and give us like a tiny bit more coverage. So I think I ended up liking how this played out. This Armor Shred, this Spreading Chaos, and like your last point into Deep Expanse is kind of flexible, do whatever you want, but the rest of this is just like a really solid way of building Abyssal Echoes. Next up is Volatile Reversal. It's absolutely busted. It feels very good. 2 points in movement speed because it helps us to kite around, and only 1 point in cast speed so that we stutter step less often while we're auto casting stuff. Next up is Anomaly. Anomaly is interesting because we're not doing a crit build. Let me move my camera real quick. Because we're not crit, we get to save 5 points in decimation down here on the bottom right. But what that means is we get to put as many points as possible into manipulation for some extra cast speed, so we stutter step less often. Cooldown recovery speed, which means that Anomaly is permanent uptime, even though I don't have any cooldown recovery speed on my helmet. And it also means that we get to spam Devouring Orb more often, so we have more clutter. We have more Devouring Orbs and more Abyssal Orbs spawning on the screen. And then we also have 4 points into Leech and 4 points into Leech. So these points felt very, very good to me. There were multiple instances of like being 300 or higher in the arena, and I was just like, wow, my Leech is kind of carrying me right now because it feels very, very good. So I liked having these 4 points. And this kind of stuff is enabled by just the fact that we don't need to put points into the crit nodes down here. The last bit is Sigils. Some people complain about Sigils. I don't know. I feel like Sigils are just like way too strong. They're kind of boring. You don't get to make many decisions. You just kind of have them, and they give you stats, and they give you stats, and they also give you more stats. So I wanted stats, and I wanted armor, and I wanted damage, and I wanted flat damage, and I wanted all the stuff. So we took them. They're great. You could drop Sigils. I think Sigils is the thing that I would drop if I wanted to add in like Lunge or Rebuke or Smite or something like that. But everything else here feels pretty flippin' good. We talked about gear already. We talked about the skills themselves. The passive tree shouldn't be much of a surprise for you. I think the only thing that I want to comment on for the passive tree is putting all 10 points in Time Legion. I wish that this would change a little bit. So if you're a spellcaster in like a Void Knight spellcaster, putting 1 point into Time Legion gives you 1% echo chance. And it doesn't give you any timer out chance, doesn't give you any cast speed, doesn't give you anything. And I still want to take it. But it kind of feels bad. So every time that you echo, right, it also means that your character is going to have 2 orbs around you instead of just 1 orb. So it helps to create more hits. And having additional echoes is good for a build that has like some kind of permanence to it. So if you think about like a Void Knight, like Hammer Throw, Turbo Smite, Cast Smite on Hammer Throw hit, every time that you throw your hammer, if it's echoed, now you have 2 hammers spiraling around you, and you can proc stuff. It's kind of like a more multiplier for your attack speed. I do wish this node had something else for it, for casters. I wish like maybe the time rot chance would also apply to casters instead of only being melee. Or maybe like 1 cast speed per point. I wish they were like a tiny bit more to benefit casters. Because there's so much caster stuff or like caster skills in a Void Knight. I wish that there were also some additional support here as well. That said, nothing else should be interesting here. Vitality, damage. We have one miser point into crit multi, just in case we crit. But at this point, I mean, it doesn't really do anything because we have no crit chance. So that's the build. Legendary items are incredible. One of the questions that I had going into this tournament and going into last week's tournament as well is how many legendary items are people going to have in their builds during a 3 or 4 day tournament? So I think 1 is pretty realistic. I'd be surprised if like you didn't find any sweet item that goes into your build, right? Because like there's so many cool uniques out there, man. So we ended up with 3. If we only had 1, if we only had the Titan Heart, I think I'd still be very happy. I'm kind of impressed that I have like 3 legendary items in the build. But listen, I kind of play a lot for weekend tournaments, so I might be the outlier here. I would say like maybe 1 to 2 legendary items is kind of what I would expect for people to do in these weekend tournaments. And that's awesome, right? So even in hardcore, we farmed through dungeon 1, 2, and 3. We never fought Julra in the tier 4 dungeon. We never fought the boss in the dungeon. But we did, farm tier 4 dungeon looking for a bunch of exalted items. And that's where we found like some extra rings to cover our resistances, some extra amulets to kind of fill in the mana regeneration that I was looking for in this build. We have about 14 here, and I think going less wouldn't feel as good. I liked having mana regen. But yeah, I think the Julra farming, you'd probably kill tier 4 Julra in softcore as well, or just maybe farm the tier 4 dungeon in hardcore. It's pretty realistic. And it's been a really nice addition to these weekend tournaments because it gives you more stuff to do and more goals to set for yourself. So that's about it. Thanks for being here. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave those in the description, or I guess in the comment section of this video, or you can just drop by Twitch at twitch.tv/bearthepig. And that about does it. Right? I think so. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here.